Good evening, 49er faithful. Welcome to another episode of Between Two Beards. As always, I'm your host, Rob Schuh. That's my co-host, Randon McMahon. We are very excited to get into roster cuts today. A little bit of news since the last time Randon and I were here together. We'll be talking about Trey Sermon, Jimmy G, the 53-man roster, filling out the practice squad. We have got a lot of good information to go. But first and foremost, got to check in with my favorite co-host, Randon. How are you doing today, my friend?
Doing good. Yeah, I just had the day off. Went to the gym this morning, watched some nice anime, and cleaned up the house. So not too bad.
Always important to get in that anime and house cleaning. Those are top two priorities of the summer, for sure.
Well, it's so weird because at the dealership, like they gave me like 3 shirts, the polos or whatever, but it's like I have to wash them like twice a week for me not to smell it. It's 100 degrees out here in Texas, so it's like I'm constantly doing laundry, even though there's only one person in this household. So it just feels weird.
Those work shirts, man, twice a week. That is something else, man. You got to get a full week of work shirts. Got to get to that level. I'm telling you.
I've messaged the HR lady about ordering new shirts, and it's been like 2 weeks and she hasn't got back to me.
Damn it. HR, if you're watching the show here, we need to get Randon a few more shirts. I want to say what's up to those of you that are here in the chat. Always love that good vibe of folks here. Charles Thurman coming in to say hello to everybody. Hello, Rob, Brandon. Go 49ers. Hope we get a better offensive line. We will talk about the player that the 49ers did bring in off waivers today. We've got LS10 Sneakerhead here on the channel as well, coming in to say hello, Rob, and fellow faithful. Rob, thank you for delivering great content weekly, sir. Thank you for being here on the regular. Want to thank the Gabe Niners Show, Melvin Crediford, Stephen McGinnis, sorry about that, Raphael 562 Niners, Quesadilla Thrilla 71, Kim Adams Treasure Kisses, Jamie Bryant Gold Blooded, John B, Darren Worthington, Pete Gorman. Appreciate everybody here in the chat. Appreciate those of you putting out the smash that like button message so that Randon and I can get our program out to more and more faithful. Excited to see the season rolling around and the number of some subscribers continually growing. Love the excitement of the regular season, Randon. Let's get into this freaking thing. The first topic of the day is the one that feels most relevant because it was today's news, and that is the fact that the 49ers have now waived Trey Sermon. We'll get into this fact that the 49ers had originally come into today in building out the 53-man roster with 6 running backs. Obviously, one of those being Kyle Juszczyk, but 5 halfbacks on the roster. That was definitely running back heavy. So cutting one from that room, I suppose, made sense. They had to clear a spot for the offensive lineman that they brought in. Were you surprised that Trey Sermon was waived today after making the 53-man roster?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, with Mitchell not practicing all preseason and everything like that, they seemed like they needed to have a little bit more depth. Didn't they keep like 50 linebackers? And it just, we'll get into the 53 later, but as far as his play on the field, generally I take what Lynch and Shanahan say, like in the press conferences. What they've said about the Jimmy G situation has folded out to exactly what they've said. Right. And we're going to get to that later on. So I was like, okay, well, if Lynch is saying that Sermon had a great camp, obviously he's talking to Shanahan. He's out there looking at it. So, maybe the preseason games don't indicate, right? You're not seeing videotape of every single practice as a fan and everything like that. So, maybe Sermon's shown more in camp than what we thought. And so I generally take what they say, if they're on, when they seem honest, that it usually is the truth, because Shanahan doesn't really have that BS gene in him, right? Unless it's a smart ass question from a reporter, then he usually gives one back. But I don't know, man. Like, it just seemed like, okay, well, hey, we thought, hey, the investment in the 3rd round pick, most teams don't want to like cut losses for people they've drafted high right away. And then the fact that most of the undrafted free agents don't get sniped up from other teams for the most part, right? Everybody thought Poe was going to get picked up, did not, right? And so it just really depends. And so I was like, okay, they could probably keep Sermon and put down Mason and he probably would pass through, and that's what I thought would happen. But it only happened for one day, and then they picked up somebody, right? And who knows if that guy, like, I don't know. He's from the Browns, right? So I'm not watching, their cuts. Was it like a Donovan West cut where it happened 2 days ago, or was it a cut the day of, and then they decided to make that decision last minute, and they were like, okay, well, we got to keep all the rest of these positions, and we have 5 running backs, and I saw this today. Somebody mentioned it on Twitter, I think, and Juice has done a lot of third down work. He's a great pass catcher. He's good in the pass blocking. So maybe they feel fine cutting, waiving Hasty and Sermon and having Juice play some more third down role. I mean, you're paying him a crap ton of money, the most money of any running back on our team. So, I mean, he might as well get some more snaps at that point.
Yeah, I'm with you that this does come as a bit of a surprise to me. Certainly, if I were ranking the running back room, I would have had Sermon at the bottom of it. But that draft stock does matter. And releasing a player in his second year is a big admission of a misstep, right? It is absolutely saying, hey, we got this wrong. And so far, it seems to me as if John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have been somewhat slow in most cases to admit that they're wrong. In some, they're not. They got rid of Joe Williams pretty quickly, but that seemed to be a different case. They certainly tried to work with Dante Pettis for some time before finally coming to a point where they released him. And Jimmy Garoppolo still being on this roster speaks to a refusal to say, hey, we got poor value from this particular asset on the team. So from that aspect, I was a little bit surprised by the Trey Sermon release. Also surprised that it was adding an offensive lineman to the room and then releasing a running back, even though they did have a heavy running back room. To me, the heavy running back room was offset by a lighter wide receiver room. Maybe the 49ers feel that because they've now invested in a 4th tight end that they have enough skill position players, and they needed that extra depth along the offensive line. This one is fascinating to me to wonder if he gets claimed. We obviously saw JaMychal Hasty being one of 2 players that were claimed from the 49ers waivers. 49ers waived JaMychal Hasty and Tariq Castro-Fields as the 2 players that did get claimed. JaMychal Hasty getting claimed by the Jaguars, right? So one of the teams at the top of the order when it comes to grabbing players off the waiver wire. I haven't seen anyone reference how many other teams placed a waiver claim for JaMychal Hasty. That could give us a clue as to whether Trey Sermon might get snatched up. If you have a team later on that put in a claim for Hasty, you might see them put in a claim for Trey Sermon as well. I've also seen people reference the idea of someone within the division possibly grabbing Trey Sermon. What do you think? Do you think he clears waivers and is able to come back to the practice squad for the 49ers, or does someone swoop him up?
Well, first I want to say thank you to Sneakerhead Treasure Kisses for shouting out the hat. Got it on my vacation trip there with the old school colors. I like it there. But Hasty, kind of like his smaller frame and his different skill set. I wonder if they're just getting insurance, right? Like ETN's off the Liz Frank injury. You have James Robinson off the Achilles. Like their best 2 running backs are coming off of pretty major injuries. ETN's been the star of camp so far, but maybe they feel like they want to limit his touches as much as possible with that foot. But it's been a full year, and so who knows how they actually feel about it. But he seems like kind of a nice compliment if ETN were to miss some time, and then they have that big gamble in James Robinson, right? No running back has ever come back from an Achilles tear and dominated the league like he used to. He was a 2-time 1,000-yard rusher, I believe.
Right.
So it's something to kind of take a look at there. As far as Trey Sermon, I think somebody will take a swing at the draft stock.
I do too.
Whether it's the 4th guy, but as we said before, I mean, everybody cut 20-something guys 2 days ago, right? And there were probably quite a few running backs cut, and there was over 30 last year that ran for over 1,000 yards. So who knows? I mean, there's teams like the Minnesota Vikings. I believe they cut, I think, 8 or 9 draft picks within the last 2 drafts already. So like they're just chopping house. I mean, Kellen Mond among other 3rd rounders and stuff like that. So maybe teams aren't holding on to draft stock as much as they used to, and because there's so many players left in the league, right? Everybody gets more practice squad guys and stuff like that, and then there's veteran exceptions on the practice squad, and so there's just so much more talent readily available. Maybe there's just not that much of a concern to say, hey, I missed on a 3rd-round pick. Let's move on. It's not a 1st or 2nd round, but you still think 3rd-round picks should be immediate starters, right? All-pro Fred, 3rd-round pick. By the way, him and his wife did a cute thing today. I saw him post. They did like a 10 questions game about their relationship and his
nice
game prep. It was kind of like a little cute thing. So if you like Fred Warner, like look at his his social media. He posted it on there, a link to it or whatever.
Good insight. Always like to get a little flavor of the individual themselves, not just the player. A little bit of the man behind the face mask. That's a cool one. Yeah, I tend to agree that it seems likely to me that somebody picks up Trey Sermon. To your point of 1 year into this thing, poor system fit, all these other teams are going to say to themselves, well, what draft grade did we have on Trey Sermon? They're not going to be looking at Trey Sermon and the lack of success he had in San Francisco. They're going to go back and say, what would we have drafted Sermon at? What were those skills that we saw in him that arrived at that particular draft grade? And then can our coaches bring that back out of him, right? Some coach will say to themselves, we can coax it out of him, even if the San Francisco 49ers were unable to. So I do think that he gets claimed by someone. I'd be thrilled if he, like many other players, made it back to the San Francisco 49ers practice squad. I've been thrilled by the number of players that have made it back there. We'll get into the practice squad to close out the show today. I did want to touch on this concept of the Niners continuing to draft running backs high in the draft and the question as to whether they should or should not. It was a great tweet by Ari Mirov that put out this statistic. Kyle Shanahan's running backs, those that have underperformed. Trey Sermon, trade up into the third round, cut after 1 year. Joe Williams, trade up into the fourth round, cut after 1 year. Jerick McKinnon, signed for $30 million. Tevin Coleman, signed for $10 million. I'm going to put in my own thought there that's very much worth the money in my mind. I'm not standing for the Tevin Coleman slander, but I know I'm in a minority there. The people that had success, according to Ari Mirov's tweet, again, Mostert, undrafted. Breida, undrafted. Jeff Wilson Jr., undrafted. And Elijah Mitchell, 6th round. So it begs the question, should the 49ers continue to invest these early round draft picks, or should they just rely on their ability to find late round steals and undrafted free agents?
So if you look at fantasy drafts this year, I mean, I've been 4 of them. Where are all the top running backs taken?
Near the top.
First, second, third round, right?
Yep.
So to have a truly revolutionary running back with 4 years of term, where Trey Lance is still on his rookie deal, and you have a star, maybe all-pro running back and a all-pro quarterback on the same team, and you can put the rest of the team around him, so it begs the thought of, hey, like, let's take that swing.
Yep.
When you trade up for Sermon, you're putting your balls on the table that this is the guy, right? Like, they sat there and took the Ty Davis Price pick, but you went up and got Sermon. And so the miss is even greater when you're making that statement to trade future assets to move up and get this guy.
Yeah, they traded 2 4th-rounders. Odds are one of those 4th-rounders would have contributed on some level.
So I think it's human mentality, right? When things the stuff that you expect to happen doesn't happen, or like your best friends betray you or do something, like that stuff sticks in your mind. Like, okay, we're moving up in the third to get Sermon. Like, this guy better be the dude.
Yeah.
Right. And then when you get undrafted guys or late round picks to come out and dominate, like, nobody cared about the draft pick of Elijah Mitchell. They were all saying, hey, why did we pick 2 running backs? Right.
Right.
But could you imagine what Shanahan could do with a Javonte Williams? Could you imagine what Shanahan could do with a Najee Harris? Like,
yes,
these guys are huge. And my thing is, when you were the Niners of 5 years ago and they took over, like, there are more important things than drafting a running back high.
Right.
My thing is this: when your team is almost complete and running back is the only position where you need to fill it, these are the numbers that I did for the last draft. From 2006 to 2016, there were 24 running backs taken in the first round. Over 54% of them made at least one Pro Bowl. Over 33% made multiple Pro Bowls. And 30% of those were first-team All-Pros. 12% were offensive players of the year. And so what it means to me is, like, yeah, you can find running backs late. I'm not a fan of paying running backs. It's a business.
Yeah.
Chew them up for 4 years and draft somebody different. Like, that is as much as it is, and you get attached to these guys, it is what it is. It's just a different part of the mentality now. When quarterbacks are making $50-60 million, you can't afford to pay everybody. So
no.
But my thought is this: okay, if the team is Super Bowl ready, as what everybody says they are,
right,
and the only weakness maybe is running back in a couple years, right? Maybe Elijah Mitchell's on the 3rd year of his deal. why not draft a Javonte Williams in the second round? Why not
Yeah.
draft this guy high to take you in? Because then Lance is getting his second contract, and then you could have an all-pro type player if you pick the right guy.
Yep.
Which the odds are pretty high from what I just said, to be an all-pro running back on a nothing deal, and then really generate an ultimate type offense. So I'm on both camps. Like doubling down third round picks made no sense to me. This year, like drafting Ty Davis Price but I am a fan of investing in running back. Whether you take multiple swings in the late rounds or you go out and get your guy when your team is ready, I'm a fan of that. Like Breece Hall going to the Jets doesn't really make sense to me because the Jets needed so many more different things.
They're so far away. They need pieces still.
Yeah.
Whereas the 49ers roster, I think we're in alignment here. I see this very similarly that I know Kyle Shanahan is saying to himself, just wait until I hit on one of these early round running backs. Like, you guys keep talking your shit. Yeah, I keep landing these 6th round undrafted free agents. That's because me and my staff are badasses and we do all the research. One of these times we're going to swing and hit on one of these early round running backs as well. And just imagine adding one of those Pro Bowlers like you're talking about to an already stacked backfield. So I'm with it. You got to keep taking the swings. You can't be afraid. I do think as you get closer to a complete roster that you can go earlier and earlier to really attempt to land that all-star running back when it is the last missing piece. And I understand that a lot of fans will say, well, this team isn't complete. It has holes at safety. It has holes at offensive line. But when you look at the way they put this together, those holes have become more apparent the closer we got to the regular season. These decisions were made back at the draft. So I would continue to invest. I want to get to a couple of comments here. One's the super chat from Chris Royal coming in. Juice on 3rd and 1 or 2 is by far better than Sermon. I truly like the kid, but he just hasn't seemed to produce the vision you expect from a player. He did seem to continue to hesitate behind the line, not hitting the holes as fast as the other backs. And eventually, if you are going to be one of the bigger backs on the roster, you need to be able to pick up those 3rd and 1s, 3rd and 2s. I'm in alignment with Chris here that I have a greater amount of trust in Kyle Juszczyk to hit those than I do Trey Sermon. From that perspective, again, I'm okay with the risk of him being claimed by another team.
Well, the whole backfield is huge, right? Like Elijah Mitchell is like 217, Ty Davis Price over 220, Jordan Mason I think is over 220. Like there's a lot of big guys there, so it's not like Sermon was the only guy with some weight. What baffles me is, if I remember correctly, he was top 2 in the combine in his draft year for the 10-yard burst. He just didn't have that breakaway speed, and you just didn't see it. You didn't see him get that burst and get past the line of scrimmage in real game time. So I always wonder, you saw it with Ty Davis Price, right? Lost 10 pounds to go to the combine to run a faster 40 and then put it back on. You wonder if you get these false results for higher draft stock, and then that's really not their game. You know, it just depends on what you're thinking there. But I was talking about pass protection mainly and catching ability. I'd be fine with Juice because he seems to be able to do that. But Sermon, outside of the play where Jalen Moore just got turnstiled and Sermon wasn't expecting the defensive lineman in his grill that quick, I thought he looked pretty decent in pass protection from what I saw. And I didn't go back and watch every single game, right? This is just live in my memory. But
sure.
But it seemed like he did pretty good. No burst, right? Like there was almost zero burst outside that one run. And hey, and I think a lot of these late round people like, oh, we should always do late round. Like are underestimating the godlike play calling of Shanahan and getting these people open, right? I mean,
yeah,
it just really is something of that nature of drawing these plays up to be. That's why you have a different lead rusher every season.
And to be clear on my end, I am not insinuating that the Niners should only go for higher end running back. No, they need to continue taking those swings at late round running backs and undrafted free agents. I just think if you watch Shanahan's way of going about this, had he hit on both Sermon and Elijah Mitchell last year, imagine what would have been if Ty Davis Price ends up being the guy this year and you have Jordan Mason added to the mix. Imagine how great this running back room could be. Speaking of how good the running back room is, here's a quick hitter for you, Randon. T-Town Jersey Niner coming in to say, Rob, best halfback on the team, hands down, is go. Randon, who is your answer for best halfback on the team?
As far as all around necessity for the team, it's probably Juice, right? I mean, if you're talking about pure running back,
Yeah, pure running back. But if we go halfback and take Juice out of it, if we just go from Ty Davis Price, Elijah Mitchell, Jordan Mason, and Jeff Wilson Jr., who do you see as the best halfback all around?
You gotta dethrone the champion, in my opinion. So it's going to be Mitchell until somebody else proves otherwise.
I agree. He's earned it. John B, sneakerhead here on the channel coming in. Rob, I feel like all the hype they talked about Sermon was an attempt to bait someone into a trade. Nobody bit after seeing his play in preseason, and so he was cut to make way for team need. I did see him as, the guy who was on the very edge of that roster. I do think looking back now, what Lynch and Shanahan said was in an attempt to get someone to come in and swoop Sermon up in a trade. I wasn't completely surprised by Sermon. I saw him as being on that fringe, as I'm saying, but when they brought in an O lineman and then cut a running back, that did catch me off guard a little bit there.
But
Randon,
don't you think?
Go ahead.
I don't necessarily agree that it's bait, because or other GMs and scouting departments waiting on bated ear for what John Lynch says? Probably not.
Great point.
He's only a year out of being in college. He was probably one of the highest scouted running backs, right? I mean, in the top 3 rounds for most people. Played at Ohio State, played at Oklahoma. People have tons of film on this kid. And then he had his 2 games last year and the 3 preseason games. They could have made their own decision about Sermon if they wanted to trade for him at that point. Now, who knows if John Lynch was like, yeah, I got to recoup my 3rd round pick value for this kid, but obviously not if they cut him. It's not a Jimmy G type situation.
It is not a Jimmy G type situation, but you know what is a Jimmy G type situation? The Jimmy G situation, and that's what we're talking about next. But I do want to say hello to Charles Alt the third and the fourth, who are in the house. I agree, loving the way this roster's shaping up, and we are going to be talking about that in just a moment. Agree that we're glad that they have addressed the O-line in some way. We'll see if they've done enough there. But let's talk about the Jimmy G situation. This obviously happened on Monday. But when you look at this, the overwhelming narrative of panic that I'm seeing seems to be related to what we've seen from Lance most recently, which was his struggles against the Texans and a couple of bad practices here and there, or at least inconsistencies at practices. When you take that, the last performance we saw from Lance being a questionable one that led people to various conclusions. And then you see Jimmy Garoppolo being kept around, signed for what is either a great deal for the team, or if he starts throughout the season, a pretty good contract for a starting quarterback within the league. When you combine those two, how different would the Lance Garoppolo narrative be, in your opinion, if Lance had been dominant against the Texans? Would there be the same level of panic had he played a little bit better there?
For me, it's 0. If you're asking me that question directly, it's 0, because it's preseason.
Right.
I mean, I think the Ravens had the record for 20 straight preseason games, 1 in a row. How many championships have they won in the last 4 years? None. So it doesn't matter. So my thing is this like I said, Shanahan's been honest this whole time.
Yep.
Lynch has been honest this whole time. Hey, we want to trade Jimmy Garoppolo. Trey Lance is our guy. Okay, the surgery derailed the trade talks. We had multiple offers on the table. Surgery derailed that. We're going to rehab him and then go from there. All right, nobody in training camp got injured. His salary was too high. There was no more spots for him to go. But we're not going to give away a quarterback for free. There's multiple starting quarterbacks in this league that is not as good as Jimmy Garoppolo, so we're not going to give him away for free, especially when Seattle was the number 1 team. Now, I said I wouldn't be afraid of Jimmy G on Seattle. No, but he's a whole lot better than Drew Lock and Geno Smith.
Yes, he is.
So then they're like, okay, well, what's going on here? And reports are now that Shanahan talked to Jimmy saying that, hey, this is how it's going down. We're going to try to trade you, but we would love to have you on the team if nothing happens. So, I mean, they were just going down their check lines, right? The Sudfeld $2 million was in case they did get a trade. They wanted a backup that they trusted. They weren't sure what Brock Purdy was going to be because, right, they hadn't drafted him at that moment when they gave Nate Sudfeld the contract.
Right.
So they just were going down the steps. They were going down the steps exactly what they said they were going to do. And now they have a contract with a quarterback that has been to multiple NFC Championships games and a Super Bowl, who executives, according to The Athletic, ranked him the top 15 quarterback in the league.
Right.
And now instead of 25 million, it's a stomachable 7 million. And if he plays maybe 15, right? That's still less than Sam Darnold, who they brought in to get Baker Mayfield, right? To get away from that situation. So it's just going to be depending whether a team has an injury, whether a team maybe like the Steelers, like bomb with Trubisky halfway through the season, but the rest of their team is good. And so they want to make that jump. Who knows what it's going to be, but it's the best of both worlds for both teams. I think it's the best thing for Jimmy Garoppolo just because he doesn't have to go gut it out on another team to earn a contract. Right now, his last tape is last season, which he played according to executives as a top 15 quarterback level, right? Whether you believe that as a fan or not, executives and scouts ranked him that high on the athletic poll. So I think it's the best of both worlds for everybody. And the only thing that I thought about right away, and I don't mean to keep going on a rant because I know you need to talk to, but
yeah, absolutely.
The only thing I thought about right away was like, okay, what is the locker room going to do? Right. What is the locker room going to do? But then my thought is this. Lance came out and said that Jimmy Garoppolo is his boy, like they're friends. He treated him very well. I think it's going to be the same the other way around. And I also think the fact that Jimmy knows what this is. Like they brought him in to be a backup.
Yep.
And so it's Trey's team. Now, who knows if we have the same start as we did last year, 3-5 or 2-5, whether they flip it around because I know the Niners want to win. I don't know. Like, I think the leash is shorter, right? The leash is a hell of a lot shorter than it would be with Nate Sudfeld.
Yeah, one was proven and one isn't, right?
There's no leash with Nate Sudfeld. Like you got a full season of Lance, whether you like it or not. But I think the leash will be a little bit shorter. But if Lance isn't the guy and he can't mentally deal with this situation and he can't play up to his standards, then he's not the guy regardless, right? This should be nothing for him. He should relish him being in the locker room at this moment.
That last point is one that I want to hit again, but do want to talk about the contract where I'm in agreement with you that this is an absolute win for the San Francisco 49ers. You can look at it from a different perspective if you consider it from Jimmy's, where I think he is taking a very safe approach. But if you look at it from the San Francisco 49ers standpoint, if he doesn't play, he becomes a very affordable insurance policy. $7 million for a backup quarterback that is the caliber of a starting quarterback is a very affordable deal. And if he gets the maximum amount, I love this. Eric Branch put this out on Twitter. He said, if Jimmy Garoppolo earns his maximum salary of $15.45 million, he will be the NFL's 16th highest paid quarterback in 2022. And the 49ers would, in that position, be 19-0 and playing in the second half of the Super Bowl, right? So in order for him to hit all of his qualifiers to get that $15.45 million, the Niners need to be in the Super Bowl. So if you are in the Super Bowl and you paid your quarterback $15 million, again, still a fantastic deal if he does have to play. The one point that I have around the pressure is I think I have to acknowledge that it is real, that this ratchets up the pressure a considerable amount. So Kyle Shanahan comes out and says this in regards to the pressure, which echoes your sentiment, right? You and Coach Shanahan may be on the same page here. He says, I don't see any difference. I think the quarterback position is really tough. And no matter what, if you don't win games, that pressure is going to come. I call a little bit of bullshit on that, right? I'm in the middle there. Totally agree with the back half of Kyle's statement here. Totally agree with what you were saying in regards to that, Randon. The quarterback position is extremely tough, and you are under a ton of pressure. If you can't handle pressure, then you probably don't belong in that seat, especially not as a franchise player. But the point where I want to call out the part I have an objection to is not seeing any difference. And this is from Kyle Shanahan's speech, not the way you said it. This is definitely the way Coach Shanahan feels about it. I feel like if you're going to say there's no difference, that's Coach Shanahan forgetting that he was so pissed at all those stupid questions that he got last year. He's forgetting about how traumatic it was for the rest of the players in the locker room to answer those stupid questions all year long. And if you think those questions sucked, Kyle, you just fucking wait until this year. Like, those questions are going to get ratcheted up and become stupider and stupider, and you ain't seen nothing yet. And to me, again, you just have to acknowledge that has a human toll. The degree of human toll that it has is clearly up for debate. You could certainly argue that a player who's going to withstand the trials and tribulations of being an NFL franchise quarterback should be able to handle it. But my stance is no need to continue adding pressure. Now, all that said, I still see this as a positive move. I still think it is offset by the raising of all boats in regard to the quarterback room being far better with Jimmy Garoppolo as a backup than Nate Sudfeld. So I find the advantage of it to offset the risk. I'm just not willing to ignore the risk in its entirety.
It comes down to it's the effing NFL. Like
Yeah.
there's pressure.
Yeah.
You're a top 3 pick. There's pressure.
Right.
Regardless of Jimmy being in the locker room, like you're on Twitter. I have to, all the people listening are on social media. Like people were calling for Brock Purdy to start over Lance this season already. Right. So like if you're thinking a 7th round pick is better than Trey Lance, like there's going to be pressure regardless. Like the Niners are one of the most storied franchises in football. There's going to be effing pressure, right? Like the national media couldn't stop jerking Jimmy G off all preseason until they finally named Lance the starter. Like it's just there. Like there's going to be all these stories. It's going to be what it is. Like he's a top 3. You don't think the pressure for Zach Wilson and Trevor Lawrence are the same? Like, yeah, but they're playing for the Jets and the Jaguars. I guess the Jets are a storied franchise. They've been around for a long time, but like you're looking at this, like the Niners have championships. Like the Jets don't have 5 champions. Like there is just the talent. You have Joe Montana and Steve Young. Like the thirst for another high level quarterback of that nature has been around for decades. And so the pressure is there. And if Trey Lance can't buckle down under the pressure, then he ain't that dude. But I think he can. And like Jimmy G shouldn't have any effect on that for him, right? Like he knows it's his team. Shanahan reiterated after the contract, this is Trey's team.
Right.
He's been openly saying that we're going to be patient with Trey, and we built a team around Trey so we could do so, right? They kept 4 tight ends. They have all these running backs. Like they're going to want to run the football and limit the amount of time that he throws and bring him along during the season. I don't think that's changed at all, right? Now, the only thing that I am is like I said, the leash is going to be a lot shorter because the fact that they want to win effing football games. They don't want to waste a year.
Right.
So if week 8 rolls around and this team is 1-7 or 2-5, you best believe that there's probably going to be a change going on, and then they'll go, hey, we'll figure out the quarterback position next year.
Yeah,
but I don't believe that because our schedule is easy in the beginning. I think we'll be 4-2 at minimum after 6 games.
Yeah, but in that hypothetical, I guess that's sort of my point. Is had we just kept Sudfeld and we're 2-5. We're still rolling with Lance. You know what I mean? I'm with you in agreement that I don't think we're going to end up there. I do not believe we will get to that point where we'll be faced with that decision. But if by some fluke of circumstances, the 49ers are sitting at 2-6 at the bye week, I think it's entirely possible you turn the roster, turn it over to Jimmy G. That may even be a little later than they would. But that's the pressure that I think is different. And the crowd calling for Jimmy Garoppolo when Lance struggles is different than I think the 1 or 2 drunk dudes that are calling for Nate Sudfeld, right? You're not getting half the stadium to call for Nate Sudfeld. You might get a pretty big roar for Jimmy if it's a rough performance, and that would be extremely unfortunate. Do want to bring in a couple of super chats here. First and foremost, just because it's a quick one to bring in, and I love it. Chris Royal, a sneakerhead here on the channel, just saying, you guys are on fire. Yes, indeed. It's a good one. It's a good one. Every now and then we put out a fantastic show. Jerome M coming in here to say, Jimmy G staying is my fault, Rob. I predicted Bizarro World. Jerome, we have revoked your sneakerhead status. No, I'm kidding. You made us a better roster, right? Yeah, there's going to be some stress. Yes, we're going to have to talk about Jimmy G versus Trey Lance the entire season. But let's be honest, to Randon's point, we were going to have to talk about that anyway. Whether Jimmy G were still on this team or whether it was the shadow of Jimmy G from years past, we were going to consistently be comparing Lance and Jimmy. The only difference now is that Jimmy's actually there if you want to put him in instead. So it does change a little bit. Jerome, you are forgiven for that, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, I think Texas Niner coming in saying that there is no leash, $6.5 million is for the trade. Yeah, it's for the trade, but the Niners want to win. Like they're not like they built this roster to win. They didn't build this roster to cater to Trey Lance. Like they brought it to help Trey Lance as much as possible. But I mean, I think the leash is a lot shorter. I don't think there was a leash for Sudfeld or
there was
Purdy.
not.
If we won one game, Trey Lance would have started all 8 or all 17.
Yep.
Like now, I think the leash is a little bit shorter, whether you believe that or not. But then you also go through that hypothetical: is the season salvageable if we're 2-5?
Right.
Maybe.
Right.
Maybe.
That becomes the question. Can you even come back from that, or do you just continue with the progression of Trey Lance? I'm with Matt Mayoko here in believing, though, that this is most likely going to be Jimmy Garoppolo on this roster throughout the season. I think it is a greater than 50% chance he stays for the year and is not traded at some point. I just want to hit a couple of more super chats before we get into the 53-man roster. Jaguayo56 saying, Rob, if Trey is the quarterback that we think he is, he has to prove it to himself, to Jimmy G, and to the organization. That was very much in line with Randon's comments there, that if he's going to be the guy, then he is the guy. He'll be able to handle this pressure, and it won't be too much for him. Ellis10 coming in. Rob Schuh, as a 49er or any fan, we need to ignore the media narratives that get us worked up for no reason. The one that stands out to me is the possible Jimmy G, Trey Lance locker room controversy. Ellis10, I only have to disagree in that, yes, it gets blown out of proportion, and I do think that it's taken beyond. I am not in a Chicken Little mode where I think the sky is falling, but my stance is it is relevant to the conversation. It's a part of when you're figuring out, well, do we keep Jimmy? Is the juice worth the squeeze? You have to consider Trey Lance's sanity. The dude's a 22-year-old kid. You can only take so much pressure. I agree. It does get blown out of proportion in the media. Certainly, Randon is in agreement with you on that.
I think there's no negative to this.
Right.
We lower his contract. If he doesn't play it down, we're paying him $7 million. Which is what he was going to get paid anyways if we cut him with the injury. So, okay, $7 million, we save all that money. That money gets rolled into next season, or if we make a big trade in the middle of the season, now we have cash room for that. 2, if he walks at the end of the season and then gets anywhere near what we think starter money is, which is 20-something million on a team that needs a quarterback, we're getting a 3rd-round pick. So now any trade that's happening midseason, we're getting the 2nd-round value, which is what John Lynch said he wanted for Jimmy Garoppolo. So, if we trade him in the middle of the season, we're getting value. If he walks, we paid a $7 million backup, but hey, they believe that backup is more worth the $7 million. And then if for some reason he earns all the $50 million, like you said, we're going 19-0 and we have to be in the Super Bowl, and then we're watching another Super Bowl for the Niners.
Right.
So, there's no negative here. And ultimately, as a guy who played sports, as maybe not to the NFL level, but sure, you have better friends and better acquaintances on the team.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you want to win.
Right. That's what it all comes down to.
And Trent Williams said it already. He's like, dude, Jimmy Garoppolo is my dude. I love that guy, but I'm here to support Trey Lance. Yep. So it's going to be the same thing. Whoever's got their hands underneath the butt of the center is going to get the backing of the locker room. And if that switches halfway through the season, then that switches. It really doesn't. I don't think there's any negative to this. I think the fans and the media want to create stories because you know why? Clicks get them money.
Yeah, hey, absolutely.
We want you guys coming in here and viewing this.
Yes,
right?
we do. Speaking of which, hit that like button.
Yeah. So it's the same thing. I just choose, like somebody said, if you want to ignore it, just ignore it.
Right.
Right.
Right. I want to bring in a couple here. I love the stream that you're on, and I want to continue that conversation going there, Randon. Wanted to bring in some thoughts from the chat. Texas Niner coming in to clarify on my comment about Matt Mayoko, saying Matt Mayoko's guessing. Kyle and Brass said they will not drop Jimmy. He'll be traded. Coming back in to say teams are just shocked the 49ers are taking on this possible quarterback carousel. But Jimmy not practicing with the team makes it evident that we're trading him. Just saying that's my 2 cents. First, to the first comment, I'm totally with you, Texas Niner. It absolutely is Matt Mayoko's best guess. But I see him as a very well-informed, close to the source beat reporter whose best guess is one that I treasure. For me personally, it is also a best guess, as you acknowledge here, Texas Niner. The way I see it is that the 49ers were absolutely genuine in believing that they needed to trade Jimmy, that there was no way he was going to take a contract like the one he ended up signing here, and that it was a surprise to the 49ers he was willing to sign this contract. And they really do view this as a huge net positive in being able to score a qualified backup quarterback for $7 million if, in fact, they don't need him. And if they do need him, it's well worth the money that they're spending as well. It's a bigger surprise to me that Jimmy signed this contract instead of demanding to be released outright and negotiating from scratch with some team.
You got to, like Bruce Lee said, you got to be like water. And in the beginning of the offseason, I said it on this channel that there was no way in hell that he was going to take a pay cut. There's no reason for him to do that. But now look at the field. There's no teams that are asking for his agent might have just said, hey, we have had 0 offers to take your full $25 million.
Right.
So either you get cut and you get signed to whatever team that signs you, and then you have to learn their playbook, learn their locker room, go in there, try to win a job on a bum shoulder or coming back from surgery, or you can re-sign with the Niners for $7 million with a bunch of playing guarantees. If for some reason you do get the starting job, all your tape is based off of the last season, and everybody knows what you can do. And we're going to be able to go into free agency and get that done. So I think it's a win-win for everybody.
I absolutely believe it's a win-win. We got some super chats to get to here. Chris Royal, sneakerhead here on the channel, coming in to say they get a 3rd compensatory pick if we keep him and he leaves and gets a contract. I doubt a team gives more. Chances are he's here all year. That does factor into it. We will get a compensatory draft pick for Jimmy Garoppolo, assuming he signs a deal elsewhere. It will have to go through the compensatory draft pick calculation formula. It depends on how many free agents you lose versus how many you bring in. So if the Niners sign some big free agent, it could offset Jimmy Garoppolo's compensatory draft pick. Could be as high as a 2nd rounder, depending on the contract. Everything is dependent on how many free agents go out, how many come in, and what the level of that contract Jimmy signs is. But agreed, the Niners are on track to get a compensatory draft pick in return for Jimmy Garoppolo. And I do think that there's a high likelihood he ends up here on the roster throughout the season. We got another super chat here. It's just paying us a kindness here, my man Randon. We got 49ers First Takes, Aaron in the house coming in. If you don't watch 49ers First Takes, you should. You can see the likes of myself, Randon, and other fantastic collaborators in there with Aaron, who does great work covering the 49ers. Says here to support my Niners brethren. Hope you guys are doing well. I appreciate that, Aaron, and I hope that you are doing well also, my friend.
Ditto, my man. Thank you for having me on the show last Friday. First time on there. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
I love to see it. Love to see my friends getting together and having a good time streaming, talking about the Niners. Speaking of friends, we got Dustin Kohler in the house. Sudfeld, baby. Dustin is our resident Lions fan, and they have, in fact, signed Nate Sudfeld. I'm telling you, the Lions are coming up. Dustin, I want to know, will you guys grab Trey Sermon? I saw someone point out Trey Sermon behind Dan Campbell, with Dan Campbell leading him behind that offensive line. That could be a matchup that works for Sermon. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on it.
Quesadilla be third in line. He's going to be third in line.
Yes. Quesadilla Thrilla 71 coming in here. Sneakerhead here on the channel says, will Kyle convert Mason to fullback once Kyle Juszczyk retires? That's an interesting one. We did lose Josh Hokett this offseason. I haven't seen any news regarding Hokett. I always viewed him as the potential heir apparent to Juice. I think Jordan Mason remains as a halfback going forward, but I will admit it is entirely possible. Randon, your thoughts?
Well, I'm one of maybe only one person who believes that he's vastly overpaid. But you look at this next season, like there's a hard out at 2024 when the cap hit for Juice. Like next year, it'll jump up to 6.5. And then after that, it's 7.5. So, and he's going to be 33 and 34 in those years. Maybe we get the hard out. The dead cap would only be at that point 2.6 million. We'd be saving quite a bit. So I don't know if they cut him and re-sign him or whatever, but eventually they're going to have to find a new fullback. He's in his early 30s and stuff like that. So we'll see.
We shall see. Indeed. I just want to bring this in because I love it when there is good back and forth between opposing fans in the chat, and the Ramelia Sports Report is generally always polite. I say generally because as I was scrolling down, there's a little bit of moderate trash talk going on, which is acceptable as long as it is cordial. But he comes in to say, great stream, Rob. Just noticed the Between Two Beards title. Great content. Can't wait to run it back. Season started next week, Thursday Night Football. Good luck this season. Hey, good luck to your Rams as well. Always appreciate good sportsmanship. Love the fact that you come in here for some friendly banter. And I do hope that our fans, the faithful, treat you appropriately with some friendly, good-natured ribbing, but nothing that crosses any lines. Always appreciate you being here in the chat.
Hey, I mean, not going for the Rams for wins or losses, but I have a few Rams on my fantasy team. So Cooper Kupp, get me some of those points, if you know what I'm saying.
We will take it. We will take it. All right, closing out the Jimmy G topic, Robert Pacheco comes in to say, Rob Schuh, do you think the locker room will be fine with Jimmy on the roster? I will say this. If there's any locker room I have faith in, it is this locker room. It is Kyle Shanahan. It is his ability to hold this thing on the tracks and keep it on rolling down the line. So, yes, I believe that this locker room can hold it together. Randon, I assume your answer there is an affirmative as well.
Yeah, these are pro athletes. They want to win. Whoever's under center, they're going to back up. That is pretty much it. I mean, they did it last year, right? I mean, the Houston game, they came in. Oh, they're all behind Trey Lance. Trey Lance is going to start. He's going to do just fine. They were pumping his tires. It's going to happen, right? Like you talk and you listen to a lot of athletes that have podcasts now, and like all their boys are from their position group. Right. Even in the Fred Warner thing that I was listening to today, like him and Aziz hang out all the time. Like his wife thinks Aziz is the funniest other guy on the team because that's who they hang out with most of the time. Like, and then they're best friends with Eric Armstead's wife, right? All
That's
defense.
great.
Right. So even though they're all on the same team, like your boys are usually from the same position group or the same side of the football because you hang out with them all the time. Like they're going to back up who they're going to back up. But you know, you look at this offseason, Jimmy G didn't call anybody. So, right, like if they backed him up in the locker room, but are they boys hanging out all the time? Like, I don't think it really matters. I think they're going to be there to win games, right? And that's what they're supposed to do. Like Trent Williams is in the fading years of his career, never won a Super Bowl, right? The multiple Niners have been close twice, right? NFC Championship game, lost to the Chiefs as well in the Super Bowl. Like, that stings. Like
Yes.
A lot of people forget it that stings. And so I don't care. I don't care if it's Brock Purdy. I don't care if it's Kyle Shanahan suiting up. Whoever's going to be behind center, they're going to be backing them 100%. And this team is going to try to win for whoever is leading this team.
I think you're absolutely right about that. And we'll talk about the practice squad in just a moment as we wrap this thing up. We got 2 more topics to go. We're going to talk about the 53-man roster. We're going to talk about that practice squad. I see guys coming back to this practice squad that I didn't think we were going to get back. And that signals to me a belief in this roster, a belief in this team being one of the special units within the NFL and having a chance to make a run. I think players recognize when you have a lot of talent in the building and they want to be a part of something special. You may only get 1 or 2 chances, if any, in your career to be on a team that has legitimate Super Bowl contention potential. And this roster absolutely feels like it, in particular, once you add back in Jimmy Garoppolo. Chris Royal putting the emphasis on it, saying Shanahan is a player's coach. He has got this in regard to the locker room and holding it together. I have a similar amount of faith. I will call out that, yes, I do believe this is added stress, could have a negative impact. However, I don't believe in the long run that it will because of my faith in Coach Shanahan, because of my faith in this locker room.
Agreed.
Excellent. Let's get into that 53-man roster because we're going to break it down position group by position group to talk about it. We've been speaking about the quarterbacks to this point. I will say that I was off by 2 on this one. I saw it as no chance of Jimmy Garoppolo staying on this roster. Thought for sure it would be a cut. Was caught off guard on Monday by Jimmy Garoppolo being there. And that opened up the door for keeping the third quarterback, which felt inevitably to be Brock Purdy if it was going to be a third quarterback kept. The reason I say that is when I built out my roster, had Trey Lance as the starter, Nate Sudfeld as the backup, did not put Brock Purdy on that roster. Figured there were other more valuable fringe players the 49ers would have kept. However, once Jimmy Garoppolo became the backup, it felt redundant to keep Nate Sudfeld. You'd have a backup and another backup. As opposed to if you choose to keep 3 quarterbacks, once you filled out the backup as Jimmy Garoppolo, now you're thinking, who's the developmental player? And Brock Purdy fits that mold. So while I think that there are 1 or 2 players I might have wanted to keep instead of Brock Purdy, if it becomes the case where Brock Purdy ever matures into a backup caliber quarterback, it will have been well worth the roster spot because of the fact that he plays quarterback.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of taking 3 quarterbacks. I felt like Purdy would have made it through as much as the Purdy truthers are out there. Like he was every team passed over him multiple times. Like if they really thought of his talent, like they would have picked him. So, my thought process is like, and there's also those kind of quarterbacks every single year. The only positive to this would be this. If for some injury happens around the league, we trade Jimmy Garoppolo midway through the season, right?
Right.
Now Purdy is suiting up, right? So he's not gonna be wearing a jersey on game day, right? He's not gonna be suiting up, but he's on the 53. So, but now Purdy's suiting up. Okay, we get an injury to Lance. At least Purdy has digested the playbook all preseason, all season long, studying behind Jimmy, being on the field with a headset, to where maybe you feel comfortable with him winning one game or two games if necessary.
Right.
But if you cut him and he gets claimed and Sudfeld goes to the Lions, now you're bringing in a practice squad player, maybe like a Josh Johnson. Maybe you feel comfortable with like a Josh Johnson to be on his 16th team, or, Kurt Warner's been roasting people on Twitter with his playbook knowledge. Maybe he suits up, right? So like it's just something.
You giving Steve Young a call here yet? Because I'm taking Young over Warner at this point.
Oh man, so it's just it's something along those lines where I see the thought process of, hey, we still think that we can trade Jimmy Garoppolo. Some team is going to get an injury. Some team is not going to like the quarterback situation. I bring up the Steelers again, right? They had Ben Roethlisberger, who was thrown with a dead man's arm last season.
Right.
They drafted Najee Harris to try to push that team to playoff contention with the excellent coaching, the good defense, right? They led the league in sacks last year. The good defense, they're definitely a chance to win that division, right? You bring in Mitch Trubisky. Okay, what if he's not the guy? Mason Rudolph ain't the guy, right? So, at that point, maybe you see a Jimmy G go over there to a team that's in the playoffs, right? Because the Browns are going to have to win a lot of games, et cetera, right? That division's pretty tough.
Yeah.
So maybe you see it there. Maybe you get an injury somewhere else, right? Like Colts were original destination. Matt Ryan is Matty Ice, but he might be having to put on a lot of ice on some broken bones if he's this old, right? So then you bring in Jimmy Garoppolo. So I just think the fact that you have a lot of these teams that are fringe teams that need to win, and if something goes wrong, Minnesota, if Kirk Cousins gets injured, you really thinking, the old Nick Mullins going to get it done for you?
Right.
Probably not. So I don't know. I think they're hoping they trade him in, and that's the reason they kept Purdy, is because then they don't want to have to go out and find somebody if they achieve their original goal of trading away Jimmy.
Of trading Jimmy Garoppolo. I think it's intriguing to think about this prospect of keeping Brock Purdy as the third quarterback in relation to how it relates to trading or not trading Jimmy Garoppolo. You could make the case either way. You can say the Niners had to keep a third quarterback if they are legitimately exploring continual trade options for Trey Lance. To your points as to why, that they need to have someone on board who can come in as a backup quarterback if you do successfully trade Jimmy Garoppolo. You could also make the opposite argument, wherein you say, if the Niners were seriously saying, hey, this is just a move to extend our trade window, there's no way Jimmy's here all year, then the third quarterback they would have more likely kept could have been Nate Sudfeld, because he is the true backup level quarterback. To your own argument, Brock Purdy probably isn't at that level where he's going to come in and win games if you have to turn it over to him. So if you do trade Jimmy and you only have Brock Purdy on the roster there, now you're back to a shaky backup situation, which is, just something to keep your eye on there. I did want to bring in a comment in the chat there, but I'll be honest that, there it is. Al Prez. He says they kept Purdy because he's under their control for 4 years at little cost. I do think this is a part of it. It's a part of the risk-reward scenario of keeping that third quarterback. If he does come up to a level where he can contribute as a backup quarterback, you have to have kept him on that original rookie deal in order to reap the benefits of it. If you waived him and then brought him back at some point, you would then have to renegotiate a new contract. And that deal at the end of the draft is a good one for a backup quarterback. So I think that is a portion of the equation, but not the overwhelming majority of why the 49ers kept him. I think they kept him because they believe in him. And Kyle Shanahan has been stubborn in holding on to third string quarterbacks that he believes in.
And maybe this was the plan to keep three all along. And then Nate Sudfeld seemed like the obvious cut once they had Jimmy Garoppolo in their pocket, and And value is something I've always been screaming, and this is something there, right? Like, you hope in an ideal world that Trey doesn't miss any games. Trey becomes the high level quarterback that you think he is. And then your backup is making what, like $750K, which means you could put all that money into other positions for the next 4 seasons, because I truly believe once they made that trade up to 3, the Niners had a clock to win a Super Bowl within the next 5 seasons.
I like that.
It's been the recipe for every team, right? Patrick Mahomes running on a rookie deal. Russell Wilson
Strong
on
logic.
a rookie deal, right? So, like, that's what they're thinking. Hey, like, we have a rookie quarterback. We have 5 seasons to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Let's jam this team with every single option that we could possibly have. Give all these guys extensions, pay them top dollar at their position, because we're trying to move forward with the cost controlled, which is the best asset in football, a top quarterback that is cost controlled, and try to win a Super Bowl. And now you have 2. Like, you're not paying a veteran backup $4 or $5 million. Like,
right.
You have 2 guys, one guy making under $1 million, and then you have, number 3 pick is getting paid decently, but he ain't getting top money. So at that point, like, that was my first thought when they traded to 3, is like, okay, they're going all in on a Super Bowl in the next 5 years.
Yeah, I like that.
That's the goal.
And Zachary is right here. You got to win before we have to pay Lance $1 billion a year, because that seems to be where quarterback contracts are headed after the Chiefs having to give Patrick Mahomes like half of the stadium seating rights or something in his freaking deal.
Could you imagine that? Like, they gave him a 10-year deal. It was like a 10-year deal at $50 million. Yeah, so he like $500 million.
Unbelievable.
What if they just stack up to Lance and be like, yeah, we'll get you 15 years at 60 something million. It comes out to $1 billion total. Like, the first ever. You're like, holy crap. Like,
yes, please. That means Lance is the guy. So yes, please to that.
Josh Allen level. That would be if he got that kind of money.
That would be spectacular. Let's move on to the running back room and talk about the initial cut down to where the Niners kept 5 halfbacks plus juice. So they had Elijah Mitchell, they have Jeff Wilson Jr., they had Kyle Juszczyk, they had Ty Davis Price, Jordan Mason, and of course they had Trey Sermon, which then eventually led to the cut down. When it was first announced and the initial 53-man roster was made yesterday, Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, were you surprised that the Niners kept 6 running backs in that room?
Yeah, because they only had 3 safeties. Like, there was positions like, okay, like, where are we going to play here? So, like, that was kind of my thought process. But I also thought, like we said, draft capital at that point, and some organizations are stubborn to move on from things that they believe in. So my thought was like, okay, I thought Hasty was for sure gone. I thought they were going to try to stuff Mason on the practice squad and roll with this team. And the way the Niners are built, I mean, there's injuries all the time. And so, it's going to be, one of those guys are going to get brought up pretty quickly. So, like, I think the fact that I was surprised there, but now that they've gone down to 4 and 1, and, they were bringing guys off the street last season. Hopefully we don't have to do that this season. All you guys that play in fantasy leagues, maybe get Mason as your last pick, because he seems to like him. He was giving him pretty high reps. So maybe he's a chance to kind of take that job like Mitchell did last season. But I like the combination that they picked. It's weird that they went from like all these like burners like Mozart and Breida. Now, like, you're getting some beefcakes in there that want to hit some people in the face. So it's kind of different.
It is definitely different. And to your point on Jordan Mason, you listen to the things that Anthony Lynn has had to say on him as well. If you go look at things that Jennifer Lee Chan has passed along in speaking with Anthony Lynn specifically about Jordan Mason, he is very high on him. I agree. In a fantasy football deep league, if you want to stash Jordan Mason, that feels like a potential league winner if he ever ends up getting those reps, much like Elijah Mitchell was able to last season. I agree. This one didn't shock me. I was surprised by 6 running backs. And then when they cut it down to 5, Sermon did feel like the more obvious choice from a skill perspective. I did think his draft stock was going to keep him on that roster. And on some level, it makes me beam a little bit that the Niners were willing to admit that mistake and move on, keep talent on the roster over people that have draft stock. We move on to the wide receiver room.
He might be on the practice squad tomorrow.
He might clear waivers. That is absolutely true. No doubt about that. A lot of players have cleared waivers so far that I did not expect to up to this point. Again, only 2 players that I would have liked to have had back, Tariq Castro Fields and JaMychal Hasty, the only 2 that got claimed. So I got to give it, like, if we're grading this, and that was going to be one of my questions, and maybe this is the time to answer it. If we're grading this roster, even though we haven't gone through the entirety of it, I'm giving the 49ers a freaking A on this thing. Like, the amount of talent they have kept in the building so far is miraculous to me.
Yeah, the talent's there. I think the only thing that I'm going to really gripe about is the secondary. Right? You have 3 safeties and you have 5 corners. Like, we are very thin real quick.
Yes.
So
we got some good practice squad players there we'll get to, but real thin.
Yeah.
Real thin, especially week 1. So the Niners,
like,
go ahead, Randon.
No, it was like, oh yeah, we made all these investments, but we're not going to keep any of you guys around. And if you look at it, like, I mean, I guess I was going to bring this up later, but you look at the actual roster designation, there's only 4 corners on the team. They have Diamador Lenore listed as a defensive back, and they have Tavarius Moore listed as a defensive back. So I don't know if they're planning on Lenore getting like 2nd string or 3rd string safety reps in practice, but he went from inside to outside, back to inside. So maybe they're trying to figure out where he best fits.
That's fascinating.
Moore, they tried out at corner in his first season. It failed miserably. I think he'll be the starting safety week 1. But B+, like, for the amount of talent that we have on this roster, I'm just concerned with the DB depth, right? You have your best corners with soft tissue injuries. You have Ward could be potentially out more than the 4 games that was suggested. And you're cutting the safety that you brought in. Granted, he did make it onto the practice squad, but it just seems really thin there. And like, they kept 6 linebackers initially, and they put one on the injury reserve. So like, it just really makes me nervous. And hopefully the barnacle sticks and Deontay Johnson gets signed back, and there's some, like, extra safety help there. But that's my only gripe, so to speak.
It's a fair gripe. It absolutely is. And we will get to that position group in a little bit. We'll get back on board. We'll talk about the wide receivers. This was a position group I saw as reflective of deciding to keep 6 running backs initially. That cost the wide receiver room, and therefore they only kept 5. Malik Turner was that 6th wide receiver that I expected to potentially make it on my list, had him in there. So the first 5, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Juwan Jennings, Danny Gray, Ray McLeod, felt like absolute locks to me. The question mark was Malik Turner, and I said to myself, no way the Niners keep 6 running backs. They'll probably keep 6 wide receivers because of that special teams prowess by Malik Turner. They didn't. They went with the 6 running backs, now down to 5, but have still only 5 wide receivers on the roster there. Thankfully, we do have Malik Turner on that practice squad. We'll get to the practice squad in its entirety in just a moment. But those 5 wide receivers, were you surprised that the Niners didn't keep 6 in this category?
I was more surprised they didn't keep more defensive linemen. But as far as the wide receivers, like, Malik Turner was playing backup gunner roles for the special team. Like, maybe if he was actually starting, we would see that more there.
Yeah, but he was in on some of the kickoffs, but I think you're right for the punt coverage units.
Yeah. So my thing is the fact that you look at how well Danny Gray was talked about in camp, how well he did in the preseason. I think this is more of an indication, not of another position, is that they feel like they have a strong 5 wide receivers. They don't need a 6 to push that group, and they feel confident with all these guys out there to be able to bring some sort of talent or role to the team. As much as people love Danny Gray, you're probably going to see him clearing out a lot of safeties by running a lot of streaks for the underneath and all that kind of stuff like that. Ray McLeod was all over the field in preseason. And, and this also Deebo stepped up to the plate and earned his contract, but it puts the pressure back on the other guy that he's been harping on since he's got on the roster, is Brandon Ayuk. If you really have a dominant 1-2 punch, you don't need 6 wide receivers, right? Last year we needed more because Deebo played half the season with his injury. Ayuk really didn't blossom as much as people maybe thought he would have. Kittle was injured. So, like, let's bring in a lot of bodies because we might have injuries and we need somebody to blossom. Now I feel like they feel more comfortable. Jennings has earned some of his stripes, even though he wasn't confident in camp. They brought in Raymond McLeod for a reason. They drafted Danny Gray to be a burner. I feel like this shows way more confidence in their group rather than a detriment, or they needed to keep somewhere else. I feel like he feels like that group is fine with 5.
I do too. This is a spectacular 5 for the 49ers, each one bringing a little something different. Even the 2 speedsters are different types of speedsters. Danny Gray with the absolute burners, and Ray with the short area quickness. So to me, it's a very complete wide receiver room. If you had kept Malik Turner, it would have been for special teams prowess. And the 49ers obviously felt that they had significant enough depth there on that special teams unit. Appreciate Quesadilla Thrilla coming in with that spectacular comment there. And Al Prez, I agree. They do have 3 wide receivers on the practice squad, and we will go through those practice squad names in just a moment. The tight end room looked pretty set. It was 3 to begin. George Kittle, Ross Dwelly, and Charlie Warner made the original initial 53-man cut down, but there was a wink, wink, nudge, nudge deal. 2 players were destined to go on IR from the outset. Jimmy Ward, everyone knew about. That was nothing to catch anyone by surprise. But then to have Curtis Robinson actually make the 53 and then go on IR, that was a surprise to folks. I had put it out there that maybe they would attempt to let him clear waivers prior to cut down so that he might be kept the entire season based on that high ankle sprain and be around for potentially signing next year when both Azeez and Dre Greenlaw are unrestricted free agents next offseason. But the 49ers were able to keep him because they had those handshake deals with let's see, that was Tyler Kroft and then Jordan Willis were the 2 that they had their handshake deals with. So both vested veterans who didn't have to clear waivers. They were able to have that deal in place with the Niners that said, yeah, we understand you're cutting us for 1 day and then you're signing us back to the 53-man roster. We're not going to go anywhere else. So Jordan Willis and Tyler Kroft doing a solid for the organization, allowing them to keep other players on that 53-man roster. 4 tight ends feels a little bit heavy to me, but I'll be honest, I saw why they were keeping Charlie Warner and Ross Dwelly, and it was hard for me to cut Tyler Kroft. So I think this is a solid tight end room.
I wonder how much like wishbone. Are we going to see any wishbone this year? Like with 4 tight ends? Like, are we going to see like the triple option? Like they said they were practicing some of those gimmicky type plays with Debo in the backfield. Like it makes me think the preseason didn't look too well of this, but it makes me think that they want to just like put all the beefcakes up front and run it down your throat, have Lance run, have all these guys run. I mean, all the backs are over 220 now. Like,
right?
Like it just seems like they're gonna punish people and play a lot of play action, and I'm here for it.
Dude, if you have George Kittle, Charlie Warner, and Tyler Kroft out there blocking, goodness gracious.
Great balls of fire.
Spectacular. So yeah, there's some big bodies, and we could see some ability to pick up those 3rd and 4th and shorts this year. The other hotly contested room on the offense is absolutely offensive line. Seems like that's what 49er faithful have their eyes on most because of the deficiency or perceived deficiency there. Certainly defensive backs, as you already pointed out as well. Those were the 2 areas of concern for 49er faithful, for myself, and I know you shared it at least with regard to the defensive backs. Here we are at the offensive lineman room. Initially, the 49ers did keep 9 on this one. They ended up with 10 after making a claim today. So I had predicted the 49ers would keep 8. I did not see the last move. Trent Williams, Aaron Banks, Jake Brendel, Spencer Burford, and Mike McGlinchey, the 5 starters in there. I was reasonably certain Colton McKivitz, Daniel Brunskill, and Jalen Moore would make it, and they did. The 4th that was a surprise to me was the 49ers 6th-round draft pick in Nick Zakelj. You didn't hear much about him. Everyone was talking about Jason Poe instead, but this is, to me, an instance where the 49ers did that calculation of Jason Poe, an undrafted free agent, undersized lineman. Has he flashed some things? Yes, but he has physical limitations. Is a team going to risk placing that waiver claim on him when they don't have all the tape, they don't have the familiarity, versus a 6th-round draft pick who had higher stock coming into it? A team might have placed a waiver claim. So the Niners may have valued Poe a little bit more than Zakelj, but may have felt they had a better chance to get both onto the team if they followed this particular course. If that was their logic, it was solid because it worked out. The late addition as of today that rounds the room out to 10 is Blake Hance coming in off of the waiver claim. They did get, not any spoilers here, but they did get Jason Poe onto the practice squad. People are thrilled about it, myself included. I'm reasonably happy with this one. I don't know enough about Blake Hance to speak to that claim that we placed, but the simple fact that we didn't let go of any of our other depth in the room makes me feel good about it at this point, that we do have adequate depth. And I don't believe the offensive line is as leaky as some I have seen in 49ers Twitter.
So Hans right now has played 2 years for Cleveland. He went to Northwestern for college, age 26. But he started 8 games last year. He suited up for all 17, played in 8, only had 2 penalties in the tackle position. I think you look at how poorly School and Moore played in the preseason.
Yeah.
They were like, we got to get somebody
Right.
and he's not really a veteran. He's only played 1 year, but I mean, McKivitz hasn't started 8 games for us, has he? Like, as far as my knowledge, like he's spot started here and there. Like, he was an official starter for the Browns for 8 games. And Browns, a lot of people don't maybe know that they have one of the most dominant run games in the league.
Right.
And their offensive line, I believe, was ranked in the top 5 last season. So for him to make that roster last season and start 8 games shows some sort of prowess. Maybe they felt like they didn't need him this year, or something else happened. I don't know. I'm not a Browns beat reporter, but
Right.
as far as like the baseline stats of what I'm seeing, I'm liking that he's younger. I'm liking that he's had real game experience, and he's with a rushing attack that is potent. That was good with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. And I felt like the tackles were by far the weakest part of the offensive line during the preseason. Now, obviously, you hope you never have to use them with Trent Williams and Mike McGlinchey, but chances are Trent Williams has never played a full season. Mike McGlinchey coming off an injury, you need to have more confidence in the tackle position. And I think based on just paper and no tape watching of whatsoever, I like the pickup.
I do too. And I do have to say, I thought the corresponding move was going to be Jalen Moore getting released, because I agree. I thought that he really struggled this offseason. The 49ers obviously holding on in the hopes that he will recover and begin to show something this offseason. Like what Al Prez is coming in here to say, Blake Hance plays both tackle and guard, well suited in blocking in the run. To Randon's point, absolutely a fantastic run blocking team in the Cleveland Browns. I got to thank Quesadilla Thrilla, sneakerhead here on the channel, saying, I just shared the show with about 8 people. Got to spread the fire. I appreciate that, Quesadilla Thrilla. Randon and I love to get this message out to more faithful. I'm going to get a couple of quick hitters. These are going to pause us for just a second, but then we'll continue on with the roster. Coming in from Alex, coming in. Rob, are you confident in Kittle as a fantasy tight end option this year? Yes, I'm heavy on Kittle. I see him as a plus 1,000 yard receiver this year. I think he's going at reasonable points in the draft. I have him on 2 of my teams so far. I think the value is right. Randon, are you buying into Kittle as a fantasy tight end option this year?
I haven't really liked where his value is in drafts. I've liked Dalton Schultz and that type, because that team really only has CeeDee Lamb, and I think Dalton Schultz will be the number 2. Will Kittle even be the number 2 this season? Will they rely on him in a block? Will there be enough pass yards to go around, right? Like, according to most draft places, they have Lance only thrown for 3,600 yards. So divide that between Deebo Samuel, Ayuk, and Kittle. Somebody's going to get shortchanged, where Dak is probably going to throw for 4,500 and Dalton Schultz is the second option on that team, and he's going later in the draft. If you're looking for a tight end around that range, I would hit Dalton Schultz and pick up another wide receiver in round 4.
I like that take on it. I think that's solid. If you're not going for one of the top 4 tight ends, I like that value pickup. Alex coming back in with another good single question, saying, Rob, go out on a limb, predict which week Jason Poe will get called up from the practice squad. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say he does not get called up from the practice squad this season. I think he makes the 53 next year.
I mean, outside of injury, I mean, I don't really see it unless Banks just starts getting dominated, right? I mean, you really think that they're going to give him as much runway as possible, like, because ultimately offensive line is about cohesion, and the starting offensive line hasn't started one game in the preseason together. So, like, are we really going to see what they are as a unit until maybe week 4, 5, or 6? And at that point, then yeah, maybe you make a play there. But I think Poe is going to be something that they're going to look at maybe to bring up with injury, or if the backup guards like Jalen Moore don't get their act together during practice, maybe you see the old switcheroo at that point.
Could be. And speaking of offensive linemen, and specifically Blake Hance that we had brought up a moment ago, we got John B, sneakerhead here on the channel, coming in to say, I saw Hance take on Joey Bosa and hold his own. He could be a plug-in for Mike McGlinchey if his injury pops up or if Banks struggles. Certainly some depth there, and I think the Niner faithful are happy to see that depth. Corey Davis coming in with the super chat. We did already do it, but Corey's paying to hear it. So he says, I know I missed it, but how do you guys feel about Jimmy G? And he's yelling at us too, but he paid to yell at us, and so that's okay. You can pay to yell at Randon and I that's always acceptable. I can take it. So yes, I think that in summary of what I said before, absolute net positive for me. I will, however, acknowledge the stress that this adds to Trey Lance. I do think that comes with risk. I believe the benefit of Jimmy Garoppolo being on this roster, specifically at the contract the 49ers were able to negotiate, is a huge win and therefore offsets or mitigates all of that risk that's involved with Trey Lance's maturation as a quarterback. So I still think that Kyle Shanahan is going to have to hold tight to the reins of this team throughout the season, and the locker room is going to need to stay together. But I believe they're capable of doing that, and therefore adding talent to the quarterback room to me is a win. Randon, your thoughts in a quick summation?
I agree.
That is a quick summation there. Randon agrees. He's not as worried about the freaking risk. He just says, screw it. Go with the better quarterback room.
It's all positive. Better trade asset, probably mid-season. If somebody gets hurt, we get a compensatory pick at the end of the year. If he gets his big contract, he's better than Sudfeld and Purdy. If something were to happen to Trey Lance, I mean, not many quarterbacks played all 17 games last season. So even if he has to start 1 or 2 games, you feel more confident about that. And Shanahan's come out and said it's fully his team. And ultimately, everybody else on the roster wants to win effing football games. They're going to do whatever they can to win games there.
Amen to that. Quesadilla Thriller liked your initial answer there. Coming in, laughing. I did too. Alex coming in to thank you for that advice. Not only is Dalton Schultz already a steal, but he says, thanks for the advice. I'll be able to get Dalton Schultz late because I'm drafted with a bunch of Eagles fans who won't touch him. LOL. That's value on top of value, right? They're like, Cowboy, no way. I'm not taking it. He was already a value. Now you're going to smoke him. Now you got him, Alex.
Another steal in the draft is Chase Edmonds. Every single draft board has him in the 7th, 8th, or 9th round. Miami went out and paid him the most money day one. Chase Edmonds say he turned down even more money from other teams to play for Miami. That offense should be dynamic this season. I think he's one of the best steals for running back in the draft.
Mike McDaniel. Can't go wrong. Chris Royal coming in with the super chat, just doing the good deed. Great show, gents, as always. Much appreciated. We're going to cruise through the defense with regard to the 53-man roster and then get into the practice squad. We will keep it moving to get this thing going. The defensive line. So this one, I agree again with Matt Mayoko. I think he's a student of the game and well informed when it comes to the San Francisco 49ers. The statement I agree with is him repeatedly saying that the 49ers possess 11 players that deserve to be on a 53-man roster when it comes to the defensive line. They ended up keeping 9, and that was a surprise, thinking that they would cut 2. Turned out 1 was that handshake deal with Jordan Willis. So they ended up keeping 10 of the 11 defensive linemen I would have wanted them to keep. But again, little spoiler, they managed to get back the guy I wanted on the practice squad. We'll talk about that when we get to the practice squad. Here are the men that made the initial 53. Nick Bosa, Eric Armstead, Javon Kinlaw, Samson Ebukam, Charles Omenihu, Kevin Givens, Hassan Ridgeway, Drake Jackson, and Kerry Hyder. The deal that went down today after you had the 2 players going on to IR was Jordan Willis coming back. That is a spectacular defensive line room. They brought back those players on the practice squad that we'll get to in just a moment. To me, again, a deep room that gives me a lot of confidence in what this defense is going to be able to do. I didn't have any issues with this one once they were able to get back that 11th player on the practice squad.
Yeah, I mean, I was upset that they cut Toure. It made no sense to me at that point, but it all worked out for the best. I mean, him as a veteran, maybe they bring him up halfway through the season. I understand the flexibility of a Omenihu and Hyder, even though I like Toure better as a player. Of them being able to play inside where Toure is a little bit of a lighter body. You're obviously not cutting Drake Jackson or Bosa. So you're paying Omenihu. He earned that starting job. So then it becomes slim pickings. And we saw the the middle of the roster get roasted in preseason, as far as in the running game. So maybe they felt like they needed to keep more big bodies in the center, especially with Kinlaw having injury history and stuff like that. So maybe they went that route. I mean, I wasn't a fan of the 4 tight ends, but that was also after the fact too. So really, my only gripe is this was their deepest position group. So you're going to cut players that you don't want to cut at that point.
Right.
It's not as easy to do those things. Trey probably could have went anywhere else in the league and got a starting job. So it puzzles me that he went to the practice squad, but maybe he believes in the system. Maybe he believes that, hey, all I need is one chance, one injury away from cracking this roster, and I'm not being sent back down all season. So it's just something that to take a look at there. I just think they took a lot of the bigger bodies because the interior of the defensive line seems to be the weakness, not the pass rusher.
I think you hit on 2 phenomenal points there. One, I also believe that it was probably down to Kamoko Toure or Kerry Hyder as to that 10th spot there, because Jordan Willis does contribute at a high level on special teams. So he had that added value. And the big body makes sense. The flexibility of Kerry Hyder playing inside and outside makes sense. I was, again, surprised they didn't end up keeping 11, but once it was 10, that made sense to me. And it does seem as if they have managed to keep around that depth on that defensive line, which is absolutely critical. I do want to bring in and just say to Corey Davis, no need for apologies. Apologies on my part. Comes in to say, I'm sorry I type in caps because I'm blind in one eye and it helps me to see. No apologies necessary. You will never hear me making fun of that again. I generally just do as a lighthearted way that it's cap locks getting stuck on, and it allows me to make a joke. And anytime you give me an opportunity to make a joke, I'm typically going to take it unless it's at the expense of someone else. And so therefore, now that I know this, I will not be taking a joke at your expense here. Greatly appreciate you coming in to share that, and appreciate you being here, Corey. All right, so we got into the defensive line room. Next one was linebacker. This one came complete with a surprise and zero surprise for me, right? The surprise was Curtis Robinson. I didn't see the 49ers going ahead and clearing a 53-man spot to sneak him onto IR just to have depth at a room that might be the best room in the league to begin with. But the 49ers obviously felt good about it with those handshake deals they had in place. So once we learned about those handshake deals, again, it made more sense. Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, Azeez Al-Shire, the starters here, Oren Burks, and Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles locking down the other 2 spots. And then, of course, the move taking Curtis Robinson onto IR. He can come back after the first 4 weeks of the season, just as Jimmy Ward can, isn't out for the entirety of it, but is also a guy that remains under team control for next offseason if he makes it through the entire 2022 season. Because, again, they do have Dre Greenlaw and Azeez Al-Shire both becoming unrestricted free agents at the conclusion of this season. This room, there was no doubt for me who the 5 that were making the 53 were. Again, surprised by the injury move, but once that was explained away, this one was a perfect fit for me. I would not have arranged this linebacker room any differently. Would you have, Randon?
I mean, McCrary Ball was one of the people too that got cut that a lot of people were like, hey, he ain't gonna make it.
No way he clears waivers.
Yeah. So, I mean, we got him on the practice squad, and then Robinson has been, from what I've seen around, we're just Boston chops here, man. Like, welcome to the 49er fam. Welcome to the it's just, I think the fact that he was doing good on special teams, and like the Niners have put so much emphasis on special teams, plus with the handshake deals in the background, it makes it a no-brainer to keep him, I don't know how long his injury is supposed to be, but it keeps him there.
High ankle sprain.
It keeps him in the building for another, 4 weeks or whatever the IR minimum is.
Right.
And then you go from there and make that decision whether to try to stash him or do that. But it gives you an opportunity to keep him in the building for a little bit longer. The linebacking core, I think, is probably the best core on the entire team with how stacked it is. And we'll see after next season, no too many teardrops, but Azeez and Greenlaw both might be getting some decent contracts if they play well this season. And
they deserve it. They deserve it. Hate to see him go, but they deserve it. Man, I agree. This is a talented linebacker room. Love the way it was put together. Let's get to the defensive backs, because I think you got a point here in the fact that 5 defensive backs, 5 cornerbacks, 3 safeties after putting Jimmy Ward onto IR, right? Initially brought through 4, but knowing Jimmy Ward was going to miss the first quarter of the season. The defensive backs are Charvarius Ward, Emmanuel Mosley, and Samuel Womack as your starters. They held on to Ambry Thomas, even with his sophomore slump, and Diamador Lenore. They did sneak a couple of guys onto the practice squad. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Do want to call out that the Niners may have felt okay going into the season with 5 because they did sneak Jason Verrett onto that PUP list. So he's going to be eligible to return around the early part of the season as well, if he is healthy. Maybe that's a part of why the Niners felt that they didn't need to keep a 6th cornerback on the roster. Maybe they thought they were going to sneak Tariq Castro-Fields through onto the practice squad. That was the only draft pick from the 49ers that did not make the roster, which is wild to me with the number of players the Niners drafted. Tariq Castro-Fields, the only one that didn't make the roster, and he was claimed by another freaking team. So every draft pick the Niners made is going to end up on a 53-man roster if it holds as it is right now. That says a hell of a lot about your ability to draft. I will say that with regard specifically to the cornerback room, I love the players that they ended up keeping. I would feel a little bit better with more depth there, like the practice squad moves that we'll talk about in just a moment. The Jason Verrett piece is what gives me some solace in believing that we'll be okay with those 5 defensive backs, but it is a bit thin.
Mine's more the safety room. But I've heard a point today. It's like, okay, do you really need safeties? And if we're hitting the quarterback so quickly and we're locking up these receivers, I still say yes, because our receiving group in our division is nasty. And then we're playing the AFC West, which is also nasty.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to rely heavily on the defensive backs to get there. The safety room is just thin. And I think they're waiting for, perhaps they're waiting for more people to, after the waivers, but they didn't pick up anybody in the safety room. I thought I was with, I forget which podcaster it was. I believe it was Josh Johnson. He was he was one of my top safety picks 2 years ago, and the draft got waived. And I thought maybe they would have taken a chance on him. But other than that, I just think it's thin, right? It's more, then you have Odom there, and then you get one injury, then you only have 2 safeties. They're on every single snap, and then they're playing special teams and Odom. You're thin really quick. I know they got the guy that they signed, his name escapes me right now, Goldston, onto the practice squad.
Yeah.
Gibson, yeah, onto the practice squad. So maybe, week 1 that gets thrown around into a different, configuration.
Yeah.
But 3 safeties is just, I think it's not enough. I mean, unless they're planning on Lenore, or like I said, there's DB on 2 of these guys.
Right.
Maybe they're planning on one of these guys to try to be a hybrid. Maybe they bring back the Barnacle. I don't know, but it gives me pause, because you have technically a first-year starter playing with another first-year starter, coming off an ACL tear, or not ACL, but Achilles. It doesn't really bode well. Luckily, our schedule is not that hard in the beginning, right? We're playing, the Bears.
Yeah.
Revenge game for Dante
Kicking it off
Pettis,
against Chicago.
But then you play teams like the Broncos week 3, you play the Rams, and then you have that deadly stretch against the AFC West. Jimmy Ward might be out longer than 4 weeks. A lot of people are saying that it might be worse than what we expect. It's going to be rather thin, and both these guys are going to be thrown in the fire real quick. And it just means that Charvarius Ward, I heard his nickname is Mooney, Mr. Mooney. Yes. Ward.
Mooney Ward
is going to be, have to be locked down like we paid him. Mosley's going to have to be locked down and help these safeties out. The front 7's going to have to get to the quarterback quicker than anything. And Nick Bosa is planning on doing his part by over 20-plus sacks by every single autograph he's signing right now. So hopefully it all works out as a defense as a whole, but it does give me a little bit of pause.
8 defensive backs total is not a whole lot. It is really thin. And the way that I view it is we're most likely headed for week 1 with 3 healthy safeties on the roster. And then the 49ers most likely bringing on a veteran safety at that point, either Tayshaun Gibson up from the practice squad or Jaquiski Tart coming back after having been cut by the Eagles. I see that move as more likely happening after week 1 so that they don't have to guarantee either one of those veteran salaries. They could then bring them on board for a game or 2 or 3, filling in until Jimmy Ward returns, and then cut them, not be liable for the entire year's salary. I think there's not much of a comment to be made on the special teams unit. Tabor Pepper, Robbie Gould, Mitch Wisnowski, zero surprise there. Special teams is locked down when it comes to those 3. So let's jump into the practice squad additions.
How funny was Tabor Pepper's Madden little short that he did?
I missed it. I need to see that. He did a bit on that rating he has on Madden.
So he went to the Madden cart or the trailer and tried to get his rating up from 28 to 29. He's like, "What do I got to do to get my rating bumped up?" And it was funny. It was good.
That's spectacular. Yeah. That is absolutely spectacular. All right, so let's get into that practice squad list, and it is currently 12 of the 16 spots have been filled, with Alfredo Gutierrez also on that roster, being the 13th player, but not counting towards those 16 practice squad spots because he is an international player. So expect him back. He is going to be on the practice squad as a 17th player on the practice squad. The 12 signed so far, or at least 90 minutes ago when we began this program: defensive lineman Alex Barrett, safety Tayshaun Gibson, safety Taylor Hawkins, cornerback Quantrez Knight, wide receiver Tay Martin, linebacker Marcelino McCrary Ball, offensive lineman Jason Poe, wide receiver Willie Snead, defensive lineman Akeem Spence, offensive lineman Keaton Sutherland, defensive lineman Kimoko Ture, and wide receiver Malik Turner. When I look at this list, I am just first and foremost freaking impressed. And I also think when we see that, list of safeties being thin, you think, well, Tayshaun Gibson might get promoted before week 1, maybe after week 1, if you don't want to guarantee that salary. Jaquiski Tart still out there. The Barnacle, Dante Johnson, capable of playing cornerback or safety. My man is still going to be out there. So again, I am thrilled with this. It goes back to why I gave the 49ers an A overall in constructing this roster, is that between the 53-man roster and this initial practice squad, we kept everyone that I wanted to, save for Tariq Castro-Fields and JaMycal Hasty. I'm not torn up about JaMycal Hasty. I do wonder if the Tariq Castro-Fields one comes back to bite us, but we took some other risks that may pay off in the long run. I'm absolutely thrilled with this practice squad.
You look at, I think, man, I don't have the list in front of me. I believe there was only like 20 to 25 players taken over the entire NFL, like by other teams. I think the Bears took 6, but
what's wild is a lot of the claims came from the Jets. Like, Jets players were claimed at a high clip, and no Rams players, right? The Super Bowl contending roster. No, we don't need any of those. The Jets, we need some ex-Jets winners on our roster. Thankfully, the Niners did not take any Jets.
So, I mean, it just shows that, like, right, everybody cut 30 guys yesterday, or 20-something guys, and only 20 got claimed. So a lot of people like, oh, this guy's going to get claimed, this guy's going to get claimed. It just doesn't happen very often, right? I mean, and what doesn't happen very often, I forgot to say this in the running back thing, but Mason, 1.6% chance that a UDFA player makes the initial roster his first season.
That's wild.
Yeah. So congrats to him. But I think you're right. The practice squad is pretty deep. They have more spots available, I think, in a couple days here. So who do they bring in? Maybe you made an astute observation about the fully guaranteed versus waiting until after week 1 to add some players there from a money standpoint. So I like where your head's at there, my man. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited about it. I'm excited about this season. I want some actual GD football to start. And
GD football, baby.
and watch some actual sports, right? I mean, we got the biggest premiere coming up on Friday with the Lord of the Rings premiere, and then football the next week.
I am in on both 100%. Chris Royal coming in, sneakerhead here on the channel. He says it's past 6, Rob, you little rebel. Yeah, this was a big one. This is, we got the dead period, but the squad is built. The army we are going into the regular season with is pretty much complete at this point. It had to be done, but absolutely appreciate that, Chris Royal. And wanted to bring in Romeo Rich here. Rob and Randon, our cup runneth over this year as far as depth. I mean, even our practice squad is stout. Sheesh. Probably the best I've been a part of. Would you agree? I've got to go back and point out this fact in the last 2 drafts, right? I already talked about it. Tariq Castro-Fields was the only draft pick from this year's draft that was waived, and he was claimed by another freaking team. Probably multiple teams out there placed a claim for Tariq. And then the 49ers absolutely crushed it the year before. 7 out of 8 draft picks from last year remaining on the roster. Lone exception being Trey Sermon, of course. So a couple of years of good drafts on a team that was already stacked. So yes, Romeo, I am in agreement with you that this is an instance of our cup running over. And I do believe that this is the most stacked roster that I can recall in any recent season since the turn of the century, I would argue.
Yeah, it's hard to go back, and those Jim Harbaugh teams were pretty stacked as well. I especially on the defensive side of the football, but I mean, we're stacked there too. It'd be hard to disagree with that. I think the receiver core is a little bit better. We've been saying this for months. It's all up to Trey Lance to see how far he develops, which is going to be how far this team goes. So.
Indeed. I don't know why this tickles me, but Lee Vang, Trey Sermon, Army of Darkness. I don't know why, but I like it. Tony Two-Tone is getting the last question before Randon and I got to go. He says, Rob Schuh, Mr. Schuh. And it's the reason that he's getting it is the Mr. Schuh. Don't confuse it. The Mr. Schuh got him that question. He says, I really think we snatched Tart back. What do you think? It's either Dante Johnson or go get Kowalski back after the Eagles cut him, in my opinion. I would agree with you, Tony, in that I do believe it is likely one of those two is back on the roster at some point this season. As a matter of fact, I would go so far as to guarantee it. If anybody doesn't believe me, they can wager me. I'd be willing to wager on this one. One of those two, the Barnacle or Tart, will be back at some point this season.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a lot of other safeties that were cut too. And so, like, not that I don't like Kowalski because he knows the defense, but maybe there's some other safeties that they could bring on that are maybe a little bit younger or whatever that could go there, but they would have to pass through waivers. They would have already had to make those claims. And so they didn't. So, yeah, maybe the logical explanation now is, hey, Kowalski or the Barnacle, you know, I think he has, somebody tweeted today that he has like over 35 transactions just with the Niners alone.
That's amazing.
So one, maybe both.
Let's get it to 40. Yeah. Let's get him to 40 transactions with the way and the wager leaving. Yes. The answer to that is absolutely yes. Expired barbecue sauce on the line. You could have a bottle of expired DJ Jones, Big Dave's barbecue sauce if you want. But you got to bet against the Barnacle. And who bets against the Barnacle? What fool would bet against the Barnacle? The Niners have brought him back like 18 times. We got one more coming in. I have to agree with you, Guile. This was a great show, and I do hope that everyone stays blessed as well. Randon, thank you so much for staying on for the long program today so that we could get through the 53-man roster. Very exciting. We got one more week of dead period coming up here, getting ready for the game on September 11th. Very excited to prepare for that Chicago Bears Week 1 matchup. Randon, I hope that you have yourself a fantastic evening, my good sir, and thank you for being on.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah, you as well. And then tomorrow night, for all you people who have subscribed to Hockey Royalty, we will be on with some hockey content. So follow us there and tune in tomorrow night.
Boom. Tomorrow night, Hockey Royalty. All of Randon's information is down below. You should follow him on Twitter. You should subscribe on YouTube. You should follow Hockey Royalty as well. All of those links are down below in the description of this video. Now is the time to go find those links. Appreciate everyone here in the chat. I really thought this was a fantastic show with regard to the engagement that we had there. I want to say thank you to everybody who was here. I will be back on tomorrow talking to Sneakerheads at 5 p.m. If you're a member of the channel, be ready for that call-in show. And if you're not, be here in the chat to get your questions in as well. Until then, cheers, faithful.